Hello there. Well, before I start, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for taking the time to be here. I know that there's a whole bunch of cool and exciting stuff outside, just like with the villages. And also wanted to say thank you all so much to the LIHAG review board and everybody who's involved in making this awesome event happen. Thank you all. So, yay, let's get started. This is Confessions of a Linux Drama Queen, when hackers are totally trying to ruin your life. So, about me, just offensive security engineer. I've been in the IT industry for 10 years, 10, 11-ish. The last 6 years have been dedicated to IT security, and I've been focusing a little bit more on offensive security. Besides CFW, besides Cambridge, Security Fest, and Brookon, then there's the awesome alphabet soup, SSCP, and all that good stuff, CISSP. Fun fact about me, my favorite video game is Zombies Ate My Neighbors, so if any of y'all like retro video games, definitely check it out. So that's a good one. Tlon Akbar, Orbis Tertius. Totally sounds like I'm trying to summon a demon right now, but that's not what I'm doing. So, 1940, Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges published the story Tlon Akbar, Orbis Tertius. The premise of the story is about this made-up encyclopedia about a fictionary world that starts to rewrite the rules of our own. And how did this even happen? Well, objects that are not supposed to exist start appearing in the real world with just enough imperfections for people to be unable to tell them apart. What does this have to do with Linux compromise? Well, everything, because whenever a Linux system is compromised, that's kind of what happened. We start seeing things that start to blend in with regular workflows, and we're unable to tell apart what is hacker activity and what is operations, like daily operations. All right, so what are we doing here right now? So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the messy and annoying aftermath of Linux compromise. What does a hacker actually do once they try to break in, and how do they try to stay sneaky and stealthy without us noticing what they're doing? All right, so what do they actually do? So they try to remain persistent, and how do they do this? They create user accounts. Sometimes they create scheduled tasks through the cron tab. Well, they try to create new services, new processes, and once they try to break in, it's not like you always get the highest access level, right? So they try to become, if they cannot become root, they're going to try to find every single way they can to just get elevated access. And once they have that access, they start trying to gather as much information as they can just to see if they can pivot or move through the network laterally. Then there's also data exfiltration. And this is a very interesting one because it makes the difference between, okay, my system has been compromised through, okay, there's been a massive, massive breach. And based on the kind of environment or basically your line of work, this could be really dangerous. For example, it's not the same if, I don't know, Lulu's nail salon around the corner gets breached versus we're talking about a banking institution. So those are two completely different outcomes. All right, diamonds might be forever, but logs are a girl's best friend. So I was joking with a friend a couple weeks ago, and I was telling him, you know, logs are actually pretty interesting because if you like gossiping, you like logs. Like, they're really not just a plaster of random letters. They're a story waiting to be told. Yeah, and it's up to us to just, like, whenever you're in high school and you're gossiping, you're gathering, like, little pieces of information here and there and there, and it's up to you to put the story together. You see that with logs as well. So, network logs. We got perimeter, DNS, routers and switchers. For perimeter, for example, VPN gateways or firewalls. Or for DNS, failed queries or queries to suspicious domains. Anything that looks a little bit out of the ordinary, we want to take a look at those. For routers and switches, new configurations or updates. net flows, IP addresses that are source and destination, the type of traffic, the amount of data that's being sent, that's important too. For applications, the beauty of this is a lot of applications run in organizations are customized ones, right? So an application by itself is dumb. It's not going to be able to tell you, hey, like, I'm being hacked, woo. It's up to you to investigate what truly happened. So the logs that you want to gather is customized application logs, and you also want to look at status codes. Yeah, like website is unavailable, or like if the website is down, you also want to gather that information as well. For database logs, if a table has been updated, transactions in general, anything that looks a little bit suspicious, you want to take a look at that. For endpoint logs, we're going to talk about this a little bit later through the presentation, but you want to look at threat detection and file integrity. That's an important too. Let's just say, for example, in Windows, we got System32. That's a folder, we know that, but we know it's a sensitive one. So a lot of the times, your EDR or your SIEM is able to, you're able to create customized alerts that point you to that particular sensitive file or folder. You also want to get threat intel feeds like IOCs, IP addresses with poor reputation, malicious domains, all that good stuff. All right, who watches a watcher? So what happens in the event that your XDR or your EDR goes belly up, right? So realistically, this isn't something that happens every single time there's a compromise, but it happens. It's still there. So what options do we actually have? And let's just say CrowdStrike, for example. And this is like something that you see in most XDR or EDR solutions. There is a real-time response, or there is a console for you to manage it. And attackers are able to abuse this. And just think about all the XDR or EDR instances that are just like out in the open. If you go to Shodan, or if you go to Census, or even if you start playing with Google Dorks, just think of all the stuff that you could find. So the console that you get most of the time is a little bit rudimentary. It's not the most sophisticated thing that you can get, but it gets the job done, right? You can place in a file or stop a sensor. Think of how an attacker could weaponize this. Or even if they don't place anything or stop anything, it's going to give them enough information for them to enumerate the rest of the network. So what alternatives do we actually have if this is off? Well, we have our SIEM logs. Like, your SIEM isn't really going to be a crystal ball, and it's not going to predict and tell you right away, hey, this is what happened. No, but it should be a reflection of your environment. Yeah, so it can help you paint a better picture. Like, okay, this is what happened. Like, this is when you stopped getting logs, or this malicious file was placed, and it's up to you to investigate to get a better idea. There's also network detection and response, lateral movement, unusual traffic, or patterns of data being exfiltrated. There's also deception technologies. And this boils down to don't put all your eggs in one basket, because a deception technology on its own is really not going to be a whole bunch of help. But it's going to help you paint a better picture of what the attacker was trying to do. What folders were they trying to access? They're trying to, like, make an external call to an external IP or an external domain that they had already, like, priorly compromised. So it's just for you to get a better idea. There's alternative telemetry as well, just tools such as Velociraptor and OS Query. So I love Velociraptor. This is like an open source tool that specializes in incident investigation and forensics. So in here, you're able to create your own artifacts, and based on that, just kind of proceed with an investigation. And in here, I was focusing particularly on that log file, and I wanted to see if there are any changes. So I'm looking in here and trying to run a hunt for that particular log. All right, so we're going to start getting a better idea of how this scenario happens. This was based on something that happened to a small beauty retailer. I'm really not allowed to disclose as much information as I would like to. So, how attackers turn beauty brands into entry points. The presentation is about to take a little bit of a weird turn, but I'm going to need y'all to trust me on this. Attackers target beauty brands. And this is a conversation I had with people who have been in the industry for years. And I heard stuff like, why would an attacker want to target a beauty brand? Why wouldn't they? I mean, they handle like this whole bunch of crazy amount of PII, loyalty programs, exposed APIs, because who cares what the back end looks like as long as the front end looks like all pretty and cute and glamorous and glittery. Then there's also influencer integrations and third-party risks. Like, okay, use my, like discount code and get like free makeup and whatever. Then there's brand reputation pressure to pay the ransom. And this happens for ransomware, like, okay, you don't want to lose customers, you better pay the ransom. And obviously, 9 out of 10 times they're going to pay. This happened recently, for example, with Victoria's Secret back in 2021. The attacker had access to their system for 10 hours, actually 11 hours. 11 hours. No detections, no nothing. They were just there. And rumor has it that they started through a password obtaining a prior breach. And that's basically how they got access. Fun fact is, when I was researching a little bit more regarding beauty brands and how they're often a target and the misconfigurations that get exploited are like a little bit obvious sometimes, submitted this research to another review board. I was told, this is a hypothetical situation. There's really not enough research for you to say that this is going to happen again. 2 weeks later, surprise, surprise, Victoria's Secret got hacked again. So, and this time, website was down for like a little bit, almost a week. For security reasons, it was taken down, but even if you went to the stores were really not fully operational. So just kind of for you guys to get a picture of this is what happens to the point that even sales points get affected in real life. It's not just data that the attackers try to get. They don't. And here's the thing. For the standard or for the typical, like beauty retailer, you get points for your purchases, right? So let's just think for the type of retailer that, I don't know, sells stuff like swimsuits or lingerie and all that stuff. You get 100 points whenever you submit a picture of whatever you buy. Well, back when I was working on this presentation, it was 100. Last time I checked, I believe it was 500, so they just like boosted that. So an attacker gets a hold of an account. They get a hold of your password. So now they have your email address, like phone number, home address, all that good stuff. And they also have your pictures, like your provocative pictures. And some of these people actually have their Twitter handles in there. So given all the information that's been gathering and these pictures, and the fact that the standard person, not trying to be mean or insult anybody, that is not educated when it comes to security, they reuse their password. So you have the perfect storm in this case, like all the conditions meet for something bad to happen. So in this particular scenario, this compromise happened to a small beauty retailer, just a much smaller scale. But in this case that we're going to be analyzing, authenticated users could manipulate parameters to access admin level and upload functionalities that they were really not supposed to have. And once this flow was exploited, they uploaded a malicious file to the server and they gained initial access. All right, this is just for us to kind of get an idea of the addresses that are being used. Obviously, this had to change a little bit, and internal and external, otherwise this would have never happened. It would have been non-routable from the outside. But how did the actual compromise take place? So initial reconnaissance, this is always important. They gained valid credentials. Then they exploited the insecure direct object reference. Then they uploaded a malicious payload, and then they gained the remote shell. Whenever I was looking at it, I was like, okay, this is 2023. This was back then. How on earth is this still happening? Then I did some digging. Apparently, it's still a thing, like even now in 2025. The most common action after gaining unauthorized access is just like you place your shell. You want to stay persistent. So in this case, while initially registering to set up an appointment or a consultation, since this application relied on the shared customer account system, it was easy for the attacker to just get a set of credentials. Well, I don't have credentials. We'll make our own. And this is pretty much what happened. As I mentioned before, insecure direct object reference was exploited. If we know that this type of misconfiguration relies on user-supplied input to generate an output, we could see the attacker just basically updated their role. It's like, okay, I'm just like a generic whatever user. I'm going to become an administrator. And this information was just given right away. To me, like, on itself, that's just like big red flag. And then, as typical, they just uploaded a shell to gather more stable access. XDRs are like a beauty bag because you can customize them with everything they want, everything you want. So whenever you're investigating an incident, the very first thing that you want to look at is your XDR logs or your EDR logs. Why? Because they're really going to help you get a better picture of what truly happened. And in here we can see the user was registered, they booked a session, a consultation, then they updated their role. We can also see that they became administrator just whenever they updated their ID. All right, so we know how this scenario happened. We're going to start getting our hands dirty when it comes to post-compromise. What can EDR logs tell me? Well, they can help me visualize threat activity, see any suspicious network connections, like is this IP something I'm familiar with? Have I seen it before? Does it belong to our organization? Do we actually have any business with it? Nope? Okay, that's kind of a red flag. User account activity. A lot of the times, the EDR might not really flag directly, just depending on how you're authenticating through Active Directory. But you can visualize failures, or you can figure out a way to ingest those logs as well. You can also see process activity. If a process was stopped, or if it was restarted, or if any new process was created, file changes, or sensitive files that were modified, or alerts when it comes to suspicious activity. For a post-compromise scenario, you also want to look at your high-risk folders. Okay, this is by no means a comprehensive guide, but it's for us to visualize, what do I have to look at, or what options could I be looking at if I'm investigating post-compromise? For example, an attacker is going to try to find folders where he can remain stealthy, like something that we don't really look all the time or on a daily basis. For example, temp folder. Perfect place to place a binary because realistically, how many of you guys actually look at your temp file? I know for a fact that I don't, like at my temp folder. I don't look at my temp folder. Then bar. So that one changes in size or content during daily operations, right? So it's just going to blend in normally. Nothing's going to stick out. Just binary remains there because those files kind of change in size. Then user local. An attacker could customize a binary and make it look like it's something placed by an administrator, and that it's something that is just commonly used for, like a system update or operational binaries. Then there's interesting file locations. You also want to look at those. I'm not going to go through each one of this because, that would probably take me much longer. But just for us to visualize, Etsy Shadow and Etsy Password, those are the files that get modified whenever a user account gets created. Just like the file that contains the usernames and like a hash version of their passwords, you want to look at those too. While you want to see if there's any new accounts that have been added. Then there's also ID RSA for any private keys, perhaps being modified or just like copied to another location. You also want to look at your execution history for authentication logs that like failed authentication, or for syslogs, any general information regarding the system. For lateral movement, for Etsy host or resolve host, and you want to see those because you don't really know, and you want to investigate if an existing IP has been mapped to a malicious domain, or a domain that they have control over. Malicious implants. As I was mentioning before, this is a perfect location for attackers to just kind of hide something and keep it there just like in the download. So LD preload. This was mentioned on my prior slide, and this is one of my favorites, pretty much like persistent methods, because this is a feature in Linux that lets user preload a shared object into a process address. And they do that just kind of before it starts running. So if we know if this particular file has been modified, and the whole purpose of this is to like completely override some functions with whatever customized code you write, like that's just like the beginning of a really bad story. So once this code that has been modified gets compiled, in this particular example, it executes as usual, and the printf function is going to be loaded from the leave SO library, which is like the standard for the C language. And this is something you typically see in most Linux distributions. So if we set that as an environmental variable, which is a dynamic name value that makes reference to another location, we can just basically modify a shared object and get it to do whatever we want. All right, so when it comes to persistence and a little bit more of post-compromise activity, we're going to see how an attacker actually gathered persistence to the system. We can see they started enumerating with sudo and see what permissions do I have. And then they tried to look at SSH config to analyze the behavior of SSH. Then they were trying to basically set up like a scheduled task in the cron tab. They noticed that they didn't really have access to it. It's like, nope, you cannot do that. We can also see that they were trying to grep the word SVC out of the password file. And why were they doing that? They were looking for service accounts. Sorry about all the random clicking. This looked different whenever I was working on it. We can see that they didn't really have access to write to the cron tab. Why? I don't have the correct permissions. So we can see in there, nope, not happening. They couldn't really write there. They didn't really have the correct amount of permissions. But we can see that they also switched SVC backup. So they switched user. Whenever I was investigating this, I was like, how did this actually happen? How did you actually get a hold of that account? Then thinking a little bit further, it was kind of sad to find how they did it. A lot of people, this is a little bit embarrassing, a lot of people actually store their passwords as environmental variables in Linux. So the attacker basically got a set of credentials through an environmental variable that was kind of already storing the passwords there. And based on that activity, they created their own user account to just kind of try to remain persistent. We can see that the add-to-password file was modified. So whenever we're investigating an incident, we also want to look at our event logs. They're going to tell us everything that is the most outstanding activity in a system. For example, if an unusual service has been stopped, or multiple failures or account or authentication failures. We also want to look at suspicious cron activity. Anything that was written, like in the cron tab, or kernel warnings, stuff that involves the system crashing, or errors, or unusual, like things that we don't really see related to the kernel. Hunting for post-compromise activity or post-compromise time windows, like getting a better idea, when did this incident actually took place? Like, what was the timestamp, or what was the period of time? And in here we can see when it comes to services being stopped. In this particular example, we can see that a process was being stopped by the new account that the attacker created. And we can also see that it was our EDR that was stopped in this case, the stop agent service, stop wazoo agent service. We also want to look at shell history whenever we're investigating something. And the reason why we want to do this is, well, this is perfect for attackers because, you know, as we know, shell history is going to store the first 500 commands that were being written. Yeah, so the attackers typically do certain things. Number one, they either just go like, I want to completely cover my tracks. This didn't happen. Y'all never saw me here. Completely wipe it. Or it works for them in a way that I'm going to investigate and try to get little breadcrumbs of where y'all, you know, like typing in any passwords, making reference to any private keys, the token, or perhaps, you know, like even a file or maybe another server that I can hop in and gather more information. Yeah, these people, I swear, they just come up with the weirdest things. Also works as previously run commands. You know, like if you as an administrator were just like doing your daily work or whatever, daily operations, they want to take a look at that as well. And in here, we can tell they were trying to do an echo of the bash history to see if they gathered anything interesting. New services. So attackers usually try to create new services or kind of change existing ones to execute code or, you know, like remain a little bit more persistent or avoid detection. So code execution, this is the most common one. So they could be used to execute malicious scripts and potentially turn the system into a command and control. Or defense evasion. And they could do that like, okay, I'm going to create a new service that disables the EDR, or, okay, y'all want an EDR, y'all get an EDR, but how about I just prevent any future updates? Or get it to where, you know, like whenever you're trying to update it, I'll just pull my own version of an EDR and, you know, like perhaps a little bit more of a downgraded version or a binary they have control over. They want to use it also for persistence. Malicious services can be set up to automatically restart on boot. Or for privilege escalation, right? So sometimes you kind of have like a low-level user, and you want to be able to execute commands as an elevated user. That works out as well. All right, but how do we actually spot like a fake service? So most standard Linux distributions are going to have the name of whatever you're using plus the word service. Yeah, Kibana.service or Wazoo service. So they typically correspond to a commonly known application as well. Or, you know, like if we truly do want to investigate and get a little bit more in depth, we could just also list all the auxiliary processes that are running and seeing if they're making reference to an IP that we're not familiar with or a port that, you know, like is kind of sticking out or something we've never seen before. We also want to monitor logs. So identify suspicious activities such as unknown processes, unusual traffic, and this boils down to what I said before. Whenever you're investigating an event or something that happened, the very first thing you want to look at is your EDR or XDR. It's not going to tell you everything, and you should never, ever just rely on one single solution to do all the work, but it's definitely going to come in handy. And in here, we can tell that the attacker was just kind of trying to create a new service. They were performing a service definition, just saying which port they wanted to listen on, and then executing the service. Geolocation and suspicious IP. This boils down to know what normal looks like in your environment. Should there be a real reason for Karen from Human Resources to be sending 10 gigabytes of data at 3 in the morning on a Saturday to an IP in Nigeria? If the answer is no, well, that's a red flag. Known IOCs. So threat intel feeds really do come in handy. So suspicious IPs, malicious hashes, or files with poor reputation, you also want to look at those. Indicators of data exfiltration. And a lot of the times your SIEM or your XDR are really good at detecting this type of activity as well. But you also want to look for these little signs of things happening. Repeated or unsuccessful actions, like a person trying to authenticate from a suspicious location or something they're really not typically authenticating from. Suspicious network connections and processes. In this example, we can see that an attacker is trying to authenticate from multiple locations scattered all over the world within a very short period of time. We see Tampico, Mexico, we see Gothenburg, Sweden, we see Belgium, we see Krakow in Poland. So those are failed SSH, all of them. And then we see like a data exfiltration attempt from an IP located in Belgium. So we're going to investigate the incident a little bit more. We can tell that the attacker managed to basically mount a file share and then just like curl that database information and just, like pull it into, place it into a domain that they had control over. Resource spikes. That is something else that we want to be looking at whenever we're investigating something. So we're monitoring system behavior over time. This kind of exposed abnormal patterns, right? Like, okay, why am I consuming so much memory? Or why is the CPU spiking? You also want to look for network spikes from uncommon processes. For example, curl, or Python, or Bash, or something that has no real actual reason to be consuming this amount of resources. No corresponding visible processes. Like, there is a script, but why is it here? Like, what does it belong to? Like, who does it belong to? What does it actually do? There's also kernel modules. This is like more of a complex topic, and I'm really not going to dig into the rabbit hole. But we need to know that this is there and this is happening because this pretty much is like an open door for rootkits, right? And this is how drivers typically get loaded, or making reference to, like initial files for an operating system. You want to look at unusual timestamps, or you want to list all modules or kernel modules that have been modified. You want to look at, like the kernel behaving unstable in an unstable way, like if there's a lot of system crashes. That's kind of a red flag too. Like in this case, we can see several different errors. RMM abuse. I have a story for this, and I'm really trying not to get triggered at it. So this type of tools, organizations use them to manage assets, apply updates, so system administrators love them, right? So they make their job a lot easier. But if there's a tool, an attacker is always going to try to find a way to weaponize it. Like typically, Linux doesn't really have a lot of native ones per se. There are existing ones, but it's not like the most common thing that you'll see. You want to look for unusual or generic RMM agents, right? So this is similar to suspicious services that you're not familiar with. So you want to investigate, like the nature of that binary, how long has it been in the system. You want to look also for ports that are exposed externally. Scripts masquerading as admin automation, right? Like, why does this name look familiar, but it looks strange at the same time? I remember this was back in 2022. I used to work for a school, and I was assigned a project where I had to run an internal assessment for an asset management server. And I noticed port 9090 was open, didn't list it as a finding, but I mentioned it in the report. Port 9090 is open. So I turned that into my boss. He was not having it. He was like, why is port 9090 open? So what it does is like, Cockpit is like a GUI version of SSH. That's like the best way to describe it. So his logic was like, why get two of the same service if it's doing the exact same thing? In a way, like this is just like a GUI version of it. Yeah, just use SSH like a normal person. So moral of the story, if there is a way that you can avoid creating an extra attack vector, do it. Like, make it easier on yourself and, like make it harder on the attackers. And then I was doing some digging. Apparently lots of people like the idea of 9090 being openly exposed. So, yay. So for the scenario that I described, everything that went wrong, so I'm just basically roasting the whole entire incident in here. Everything that went wrong and everything that took place for this disaster to happen, initial reconnaissance, information disclosure via the web app. So they were basically volunteering information like, hey, this is the rules that I use. And the only thing the attacker had to do was just intercept a regular request. So web access firewall, so that was a big failure. SIM correlation searches. We did have some similars. This could have been like a lot better. Then gaining valid credentials, weak authentication mechanisms. Go to your favorite, go to a beauty retailer, and you'll know that by default, whenever you're trying to purchase something, MFA is not enabled. So if you go to, like most beauty retailers, they don't do that by default. Then there's also exploiting broken access controls. In this case, in secure direct object reference, the way that they were handling the ID roles was a little bit predictable, like 5, 10, 15, 20, and it really didn't take that much effort to actually gather this information. Then there's the fact that you're uploading a malicious payload. In this case, there were no actual restrictions for the type of file that was uploaded. I mean, the attacker uploaded a payload, but they could also, like just for fun, just upload a text file, a picture of a cat, like a cat video or whatever. There was no file restriction. No content type checking. Their EDR didn't really respond, like saying, hey, like this file is being uploaded. Gaining remote shell access, no outbound egress filtering. And I get this because since it's an e-commerce server, it's not like you're going to have like the big privilege of, like whitelisting and blacklisting IP addresses. But this also boils down to like the authentication attempts, like so many in a very short period of time. That's kind of a red flag. No lateral movement, detection, and insecure storage of credentials. Storing a password in an environmental variable. I mean, there's like, worst case scenario, there's like KeyPass and all that stuff. You don't really use a password or like privileged account management solution. That would be ideal. But I mean, if you can't use that, just find another secure way to store them. Definitely better than nothing. Too long, didn't read. Just basically everything in a nutshell. Initial triage, just node system time and time zone settings. You want to get a good idea of when the incident took place and how long, for how long did it take place. System recon, just sensitive files, usernames, passwords, suitors, just to see who has access to what can I do as a super user, or what commands can I run as a privileged user. The cron tab to see if there were any scheduled tasks, like, okay, I'm going to set up like a scheduled task to completely wipe this log location, or just like try to make calls to this external IP address. You also want to look at your network configuration, host file being modified, mapped to a malicious domain, like also firewall rules being changed. That's also important as well. Logs review, authentication failures, system messages, or syslog. That's like an important log to look at, just big system changes. Application firewall logs or application logs if you're running a customized application. Right? If a new user was added, was deleted, if there were any transactions that looked unusual. Then suspicious artifacts, file locations, or folders that typically don't really get, like monitored. You want to look at those as well. The hackers could potentially place a customized binary in there. Install binaries or change permissions, network activity, netcat and socat, or anything that is just making external system calls. Final thoughts. Audit your logs regularly. Know what normal looks like in your environment. Baseline, baseline, baseline. Automate where it's possible, but do it responsibly. Do not rely on one tool to do all the work, right? For example, what happens if you ever got like a false positive, let's just say in a domain controller, right? Your XDR response pulls the domain controller out of the network. Turns out that it's a false positive, and then like a whole bunch of people are having issues authenticating. So, yeah, that's not a good thing to see. Test your security controls. So just because a security control is there, number one, doesn't mean that it's installed correctly, and number two, doesn't mean that it's working fine, or that it's even working at all. Most importantly, and this is something that I say in pretty much every presentation, those who know me are going to be like, again, but security is like skincare for 3 reasons. Number one, as we get older, or as an organization gets older, the stuff that we need changes, right? Number two, just because something works for somebody that you know doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. And number three, you miss a step, you could potentially mess up the whole thing, because it's really not about making it perfect. It's about making it better. So that's it.